Hey there, it's Rich from Newbie Prepping, and in this video we're going to go through all of the different types of prepping. This video is more for the benefit of people just starting out with prepping, who are thinking about their bugging in or bugging out plans, and want a brief overview of different options to help them make a more thorough plan that suits them. I'll be referring to them mostly as prep plans. Mark and I consider ourselves bushcraft preppers, and our prep plans and chosen equipment reflect that. In the past, we've had such comments as, "Why don't you pack this item?" and "That's not nearly enough stuff for a bug-out bag." But what we usually find out is that those people lean towards more of a different type of prepping. There are items and equipment that are necessary for all types of prepping. Fire source for cooking meals, cordage for tying things together to make shelter, food rations, water bottles and water filters, sleeping bags to help you keep warm, etc, etc. You can find videos on YouTube as well as our own channel detailing helpful and essential items for bug-out bags. But in this video, our aim is just to detail the different types of prepping, to shed light on how some pieces of equipment may not be so useful in one setting as they would be for another, and ultimately, hopefully, provoke the newbies and maybe even some of our adept prepper viewers into thinking deeper about their prep plans. Do keep in mind, we're not trying to set up rules on prepping. Obviously, you are free to pick and choose whatever piece of equipment you think is best for your loadout and make whatever plans you want. Think of this as just a rough guide to help you start thinking about your prep plan, or maybe to help you realize that that one piece of equipment in your bag isn't as necessary as you thought. So let's begin. So we have two trees here that present to you the very first thing that you have to think about. Are you bugging out or bugging in? Bugging out is when you leave your permanent residence in the event of an emergency, usually to a pre-planned area, whereas bugging in is the complete opposite. It's where you stay in and fortify whatever residence you're in the event of an emergency. We'll go through both trees separately, but for now we're going to start with the bugging in tree. There aren't many branches on this tree, only 3. Let's look at them in the order in which would be most realistically accomplished by regular people. First one, bugging in your own home. This is a good one to start with because bugging in your own home requires the absolute least amount of effort and can be considered a jumping off point for more serious prepping. However, it can yield the biggest risks too, which we'll talk about later. In preparation for bugging in your own home, you can focus just on protecting what you already have, as well as acquiring new stuff to supplement it. You do not need to worry about how much weight you're carrying or where you'll be sleeping that night, because you'll have your cozy bed. As for what equipment you'd need, well, you can pretty much concentrate on building food stocks, maybe installing a standalone cooker, in case your home's built-in cooker is unable to function. Also, you could fortify your home in order to protect yourself and your family. And in worst case scenario, if home invaders come knocking, you'll also have a home advantage because of knowing the layout of your house. And you can use the knives in your kitchen drawer, maybe a shovel in your garden shed, to aid in your defense. But of course, prevention is better than a cure. So I'm going to borrow some advice from Mark. He made a great bugging in video which can be viewed here, the link's in the top right hand corner. Most houses have attics and or basements. And if yours does, then arguably the best bug-in plan for when shit hits the fan is to have all your supplies and equipment in that room ready for you to retreat to it. And if it's at the point where marauders are marching up your street and sacking houses, then try and make your house look like it's already been raided. Break that valuable ornament, smash your TV, upturn the tables and chairs, anything to make your house look like it's already been searched. This will likely deter marauders from entering because they'll think the place has already been looted of all of its valuables. Mark goes into greater depth in his video, it's definitely worth a watch. With all that said, this is definitely the type of prepping that we'd strongly deter people from doing. If you live in a town or generally built up area, then the threat of looters, rioters or marauders is just too high. And even if you do manage to survive for a while, when your supplies run out, you'll need to do a run to find more. But if you've been hiding for a long time, you'd have no idea in which buildings marauders may have set up camp in. It literally wouldn't be safe to roam the streets. And it's likely, depending on the SHTF scenario, that all the shops would have been looted for everything they had. Lastly, I'll say this. If you're absolutely determined to do a home bug-in, there will come a time when you'll realise that you need to bug out, but it may already be too late by then. Let's take a look at the next branch, shall we? It's quite similar to the last one, but it's the complete opposite in terms of commitment. The previous prep plan can be arguably done casually. Collecting resource and equipment here or there, it's literally for beginners in both equipment and mindset needed. Whereas this one is a full-on commitment. This is the homestead prep plan. You could also think of it as an early and permanent bug out, but it's essentially still a bug in because the plan is to hunker down in your homestead when the time comes. It's similar to a rural or bushcraft prep plan for a number of reasons that we'll go over later in the video. So the goal for a typical homestead is to be completely independent from the outside world, but it ain't no bushcraft. No, we're talking about a compound that would be completely off-grid. You'd have chickens, because they're the easiest consumable animal to keep. You'd be growing vegetables with fertilizer you make yourself. You'd have walls surrounding your compound, or more likely a chain link fence with barbed wire. You'd have barrels for collecting rainwater. You'd have solar panels to charge electric generators in your home. And you'd almost certainly have a group of neighbours, friends and family, usually considered a tribe by some homestead preppers, that you band together with once shit has hit the fan. Because to do everything yourself would be impossible. Some would say that this is the be-all and end-all of prepping. To live independently, to live off the land, but boy is it difficult to start a homestead and maintain it. Of course, we here at Newbie Prepping do not have homesteads, so take what we say here with a grain of salt, since we're only referring to what we've seen in homestead prepper videos. First off, you'd need money. A lot of money. You'd need the know-how to maintain a homestead. Installing equipment, both electrical and not. Know-how on fixing things when they're broken. You'd need farming and food processing skills, gardening skills and technical skills, and you'd need to have a network of contacts that trust and rely on you, so you can get their help in maintaining and upgrading your homestead. But the biggest requirement is the right mindset. You have to be absolutely 100% committed to doing what you're doing every day for the rest of your life. Early starts and late finishes, getting your hands dirty, and doing what needs to be done, all in preparation for scenarios that some people believe will never happen. But here at Newbie Prepping, we disagree that this is the best prep plan out there. Imagine this. You have your homestead fully set up and ready to go, and then bam, an SHTF scenario has happened and now there is civil unrest. It's everything you've trained for. Your homestead's isolated location is a big bonus because it's extremely unlikely anyone will find you. But even if you believe you have an infallible security and early warning system in place, you are still out in the open, visible to anyone who may be roaming or scouting ahead for their party. All it will take is one person to come across your compound, even if all they see is the perimeter fence. The first thing they'll think is, maybe a safe and secure location is beyond that fence. And they'll go back and tell their group. And even if that group of scared and hungry people think it's not worth trying to take on a homestead, eventually they'll get desperate. Then they'll spread the word to other people of a homestead that's likely fully stocked with food and their intent to charge the gates. Even just the prospect of food will make desperate people go against their better judgment and help them. And like zombies, which is a term used by some preppers to insult non-preppers, they'll crash against the homestead walls just like in the film World War Z. And realistically, how long do you think you'd be able to hold out? Guns won't deter them. If people are desperate enough, then they'll try anything. And who's to say they won't have guns too? Number will be on their side, and to defeat an army, you'd need an army. Is that what you have? Of course, this is all the absolute worst case scenario. I'd imagine that someone as committed as a homestead prepper would likely survive for many years. But in this day and age, there simply aren't that many people like that. And now moving on to the branch that is least likely for us average Joes, the underground bunker. I don't think I need to talk too much about the pros and cons of owning a bunker, as they're pretty similar to the homestead prep plan. But there is one unique pro, a pro that is pretty massive, the fact that you're in an underground frickin' bunker. Most likely with a metal door, presumably designed to withstand bullets and probably even blasts, in between you and any marauders, if they even manage to discover you. But naturally, the one massive con is that one day, for one reason or another, you will have to return to the surface. Whether you've run out of food, run out of power, or worse, you'll eventually have to return to the surface. And you have all of the disadvantages that the home bugging prepper will face. You simply won't know what's going on outside, and danger could be lurking around any corner, hiding in any window, and waiting to ambush you. With all of that said, the thing to remember with bugging in is that it's very likely that one day, for one reason or another, you're going to have to leave your bug-in area. So whether it's just as shit has hit the fan, or such a long time after that the shit-covered fan has gone rusty, eventually you may have to bug out. And that brings us nicely onto the bugging out tree. The first two branches we have here are the immobile and mobile branches. Both of these types of bugging out require vastly different prep plans, equipment and transport, but there is crossover, as we'll see later. Going down this branch we have the city or urban type of prepping. I'll refer to it as urban hereafter. For this type of prep plan, in this setting, and depending on the severity of the event, it would be a good idea to include tools such as screwdrivers, pliers, wire cutters, and multi-tools. Of course, if you're choosing to remain in a city or generally urban area, then you're going to want to find a building or construct to hunker down in, as you would become a target very easily and very quickly. You don't want to go to a big shopping centre or supermarket because it's where everyone will go, Most likely, one of two things will happen in these sorts of places. The crowds of unprepared people will empty the place of all of its food and valuables and then leave, or the less likely scenario, they'll band together and fortify the place for themselves, which only invites trouble from would-be marauders or raiders. No, the best idea would be to stay away from the big, easily accessible public places like that. The best option to stay safe is to hide in places that people generally wouldn't think to go to. On that note, we have two branches here. The first is disused or abandoned building. It's likely that people will ignore abandoned buildings because there would be nothing to loot or generally gain from going there, which makes it a good hideaway for someone who is prepared for a long-term bug-out situation, such as yourself. The second branch is private and defensible building. So maybe you're the owner of a small business and your main base of operation is in a business park. Usually the business parks are far away from the center of towns they reside in. They usually have high fences surrounding them and metal shutters that come down to protect the doors and windows as standard. Seems like the perfect bug-out area to me. But what if you aren't one of these small business owners and don't have access to a building in a business park with all these built-in security measures? Well, a lot of shops, both on and off the high street, have the metal shutters as standard to help with their security. Perhaps if you work in a place that has this sort of security, then your workplace may be an option for an urban bug-out. Of course it might be difficult since you don't own the place, and I'd suggest not doing this if you work in a grocery shop or somewhere that sells food, based on the same reason for not going to a big supermarket. Eventually you will become a target for hungry people. But you'll find that a lot of shops, be they clothing stores, opticians, bookshops, all have the same security shutters and will likely go unnoticed as they would be deemed likely as non-essential to people desperate for food and other amenities. For both of these branches, assuming you plan to stay in one of these sorts of places long term, it wouldn't be such a bad thing to pack a lot of gear, since getting to your location is the only real challenge concerning being a target for people wanting it. Once you're at your location, you can drop it off and hide it in your shelter, and then when you go out foraging or do a run, you only need to take a small pack of only the most useful items. As for equipment, it's pretty unlikely that you'll need a tree felling axe for this prep plan, and some pieces of equipment that would be pretty unique to an urban bug out are pry bars, bolt cutters and lockpicks. Now hold up, we here at Newbie Prepping do not endorse any illegal activities associated with these items. However, it's not illegal to own any of them, so we're only suggesting acquiring them and using them if you find yourself in a life or death survival scenario. For example, if societies collapse and you need to enter a building for safety from roaming gangs, then these pieces of equipment would help you. So that's your mobile branch done for the moment. Let's go on over to the mobile branch. First of all, let's go with this branch. On foot, constantly moving. While I must say, if you're a prepper that decides they want to roam across the land after shit has hit the fan, Fallout style, then I applaud you because you must be an expert survivalist. You must have a wealth of knowledge when it comes to foraging for food, and you must be extremely good at going stealthy and being unnoticed. And you're clearly comfortable with sleeping anywhere, in any temperature, while keeping one eye open in case of any threats. In all seriousness, it's pretty obvious that this is one of the more difficult types of prepping. Let's break down the reasons why. You'd be constantly looking over your shoulder because around any corner there could be a threat looming. You'd be at constant disadvantage because you have no forewarning about what lies ahead, and carrying any amount of equipment will sap your energy. No matter who you are, no matter how strong you are, you will eventually run out of energy. So if you're planning on going with the on-foot prep plan, you'd need to be extremely tactical and outright picky with what equipment you take. But don't take too much. The more stuff you have, the bigger target will be on your back. This sort of prep plan is a perfect example of why it's more important to have survival skills than equipment. You'd be focusing on carrying only the lightest of items, since you'd be constantly carrying everything. In urban areas, if you need a screwdriver or a pry bar, it'd be more useful and less of a burden to have a multi-tool rather than a utility belt full of tools. A tent would be too cumbersome and time-consuming to put up and take down, so you'd likely only take a tarp with you, which leaves you with the issue of keeping warm at nights. It certainly is a difficult prep plan, but definitely not impossible. All I can say is good luck. Another branch here is for vehicles. Let's go down to land here and start with the small, usually a car or a van. This one will probably be pretty obvious to people, but we'll go through it anyway. Best case scenario, you'd be a mechanic, because you would need to be able to fix your vehicle at a moment's notice. Even the toughest of vehicles need maintenance, and there is no point committing to a mobile prep plan if you don't know how to fix your vehicle when it's needed. Then there is also the issue of fuel. You never know when you're going to be able to refuel, and you can't risk going into a city or a town in the hopes that their fuel stations still have some fuel. It's most likely been depleted, and vehicles are noisy and you'd be noticed almost immediately. And if those people are desperate enough, they will likely try and take your vehicle by force. so you'd be stuck out in the out-of-town service stations where it's less likely people have hunkered down in. However, there are good points to using a small vehicle. You'll essentially have an enclosed place to sleep at all times. You'd be conserving energy by not having to carry your own equipment, and of course, when shit hits the fan, it's good for a quick escape. Almost all of this applies to the other branch too, the large vehicle, truck or lorry branch. In terms of comparison with the small vehicle branch, there are definitely pros and cons. You're more protected in a truck or lorry than in a car or a van, and they carry a lot more, but they're nowhere near as maneuverable or easy to hide. Regarding equipment you'd be taking, the obvious massive advantage is that you can carry a lot of stuff in a vehicle, far more than you'd be able to carry on your back. But some of the room in your vehicle would be taken up by spare parts and spare fuel. Not only that, but every single bit of weight you load into your vehicle will affect its performance and fuel consumption. So you would need to evaluate every single item you bring to make sure it's absolutely essential. And if it's not, then toss it. And what happens if, when your car runs out of fuel and you have a boot full of stuff that you can't carry but desperately need? Because of these reasons and subsequent questions, our opinion is that a land vehicle is really more of a means to an end than an ultimate goal of a prep plan. But there are preppers out there who thoroughly believe that they can do it, and more power to them, I guess. Let's go up and have a look at this branch, the sea. This one is clearly going to be for a very specific group of people. The only way you'd manage living at sea is if you're an experienced seafarer and have sailed a lot in your lifetime. You'd need to know everything about sailing as well as maintaining your boat. You'd need to be able to predict weather patterns since there would likely be no forewarning system in place. And of course, you'd have to contend with other people at sea that may see your boat as a supply cache, and you'd have to defend yourself. Yep, you'd genuinely have to be concerned about pirates. But you're still far less likely to run into trouble on the sea than on roads, since far fewer people know how to sail a boat compared to driving a car. But on the off chance a boat full of bad people do spot your boat, well then the chase is on. Are you sure you'd be up for the challenge? In terms of equipment you'd bring with you, you wouldn't need tents, tarps, sleeping bags or any other form of shelter, since the boat will be your shelter. As for food, if you're skilled at fishing, then you'd have a near infinite source of food right below you. However, cooking it might become an issue. You'd have your solid fuels and gas canisters for a while, but in a long-term bug out, they'd eventually run out. And say for example, if you'd managed to survive at sea for a year and you want to do a resupply, if you went back to land to try and find more fuel, then you'd not have any knowledge of the lay of the land, on what groups of people may be residing there, and heck, it's been a year, maybe all the solid fuel and gas canisters are long depleted. This is turning into a pretty common problem for these prep plans, isn't it? Of course, in this situation you could just dock and cook food on dry land using logs. But every time you dock, you're putting yourself at risk of an ambush from people wanting to steal your boat. Probably the best thing to do is install a log burner that has space on top of it to heat up pots and pans. At least then, time spent docked would not be as long since you'd only be collecting firewood, not building a fire and cooking. Oh, and in case you're wondering, there do exist sailboats with log burners. I'm not sure how common they are, but it has been done. I'll link a video here to a channel called Sailing Brick House, Rebecca and Patrick Childress. They made a video showing how they installed their own log burner in preparation for a long trip to one of the colder parts in the world. Definitely worth a watch. Rest in peace, Patrick. Now that we've spoken about both the immobile and mobile branches of bugging out, it's time to talk about the branch that stems from both, rural or bushcraft prepping. As I said before, this is what we here at Newbie Prepping practice, because in all honesty, in our opinion, this is the be-all, end-all, absolute endgame of prepping. All roads will eventually and inevitably lead to it. Don't believe me? Hear me out. Let's do some hypotheticals here. You're bugged in your home, managing to survive, but you've run out of food. All of the shops around you were pillaged of every scrap of food months ago. Maybe it would have been better to have been in a place where you could hunt fauna and grow flora for consumption. So you're holding up in an abandoned building in the city and you've just come back from searching for food. It's a group of survivors. They haven't discovered you, your hideout or your stash, but it looks like they have the same idea as you and want to make a permanent residence in this building. You don't want to stick around in case they're not friendly, but all your stuff is here. You can't handle the massive loss of all of your equipment and food, so where would it have been far less likely for large groups of people to accidentally wander into your bug out area? You're in your car driving down a long motorway out in the countryside because you know that people have flocked into the cities where they believe it's safe. You've chosen a vehicle prep plan because you believe that to keep moving means to keep safe. People can't accidentally discover your hideout if you're constantly on the move after all. Your equipment and food are plentiful, so there's no concern there, but uh-oh, a tyre has burst and you've already used your spare. And now you are stranded. You've got no choice but to walk and try find a replacement tyre for your car, but you have no idea what danger could lie ahead of you. If you believe that keeping moving means that you're less likely to be discovered, surely there is a way to stay mobile without putting all dependence on a machine that could break down at any time. Well, of course, arguably, there could be many answers to these questions, but we believe the most logical solution is the rural or bushcraft prep. From now on, I'll just refer to it as the bushcraft prep because bushcrafting is what you'd primarily be doing in this branch. You can answer all the questions from the hypothetical situations I just presented with a bushcraft prep plan. Concerning food. Tilling land to grow vegetables would be easy enough with seeds that you've saved in your bug out bag and a mini shovel. And if you have the skill, you can also hunt fauna. It can be a long and arduous process, but can yield great rewards for your stomach. Side note, you can do this with the homestead prep plan too, but we still believe that the likelihood of being discovered and raided is too high to make it a feasible permanent plan. It's very likely you'll have to bug out. Concerning other survivors. It's extremely unlikely that the frightened and desperate masses will start roaming the countryside, much less forests in search for the next meal. It's most likely that they'll stick to what they know, the cities or the towns they live in, hoping and praying that rescue will come for them with a fresh and piping hot dinner served to them on a silver plate. The longer they believe that and stay put, the better for you, because you won't have to deal with them for a very long time. However, as we discussed before, there is a chance that people will scope these areas out, but at least with a small bushcraft camp, you can easily and effectively hide, whereas a massive homestead compound is a lot harder to cover up. Concerning mobility, probably the biggest advantage to a bushcraft prep is that your hideouts or camps can be as permanent or as temporary as you require. Since it's so easy to pack up your equipment and start afresh elsewhere, you can build up your camp in a forest to make it as comfortable as possible with the relative safety of the unlikelihood of any humans happening across your camp. But if you decide you need to leave for another area, then travel isn't as risky because of how unlikely it is that people will be present in these rural areas. We're not saying that you will never come across other people, but it's highly unlikely that there will be marauders in forests waiting to spring an ambush. No, they'd all be in the cities where they assume people will most likely be, and they'd be right. So as long as you're careful and do proper reconnaissance, it would be a lot easier to move to a new location. Though we big up the bushcraft prep plan, it's only fair to go over the disadvantages. For one, you may be far more likely to get an infection if you cut yourself, but as long as you have your first aid kit or knowledge of healing from natural resources, then you'd probably be fine. Also, travelling anywhere would take a lot longer. You'd need to do reconnaissance for at least a few days to make a proper evaluation on whether an area is safe to pass through or not, because even if it may seem safe at one moment, it could be because the marauders are all in position to ambush unsuspecting bystanders. You'd need to be sure the area is safe, and if it's not, you'd need to go around, which will add more travel time to your plans. Moving on, let's talk about equipment. Well, for one, you'd need a different style of clothing. With an urban prep plan, you'd need dark greys and blacks to blend in with surroundings, but in rural areas, greens and browns are the obvious must-haves. An axe and folding saw are essential for bushcraft and making fires easily, and all around you is a plentiful source of firewood for cooking food. A piece of equipment that's pretty unique to the bushcraft prep plan is a snare to catch wildlife. You can put a few of them out, away from your camp, and it will save you the hassle of manually hunting fauna. Sure, you could use snares and traps, potentially anywhere for any sort of prep plan, but you'd have the most luck out in a wild forest. Just like with a homestead prep plan, seeds would be an extremely valuable commodity to have. Being able to grow your own food would be essential. For example, the optimal time for carrots to grow is 70 to 80 days, 2.5 months, with the correct climate and surroundings. It would tie you down to one location for a long time, but it would be worth it in the end. You could use that time to properly recon and survey an area. All of the other branches bring too many variables. Every negative point I've mentioned about the previous prep plans arguably outweigh the positive points. Almost every prep plan's ultimate contingency is to fall back, and you can't fall back much farther than the deep forest. So why not make your contingency plan your actual plan? At least that's our opinion. So there we have it. That's all the main bugging in and bugging out types and prep plans. Let us know if we missed any. For the final time, I will say that this is just our opinion. You cannot deny our logic is sound, but ultimately only you can decide what is best for you and your family. There's only one thing left for us to ask. Is your plan really as airtight as you think? I've been Rich from Newbie Prepping, narrating an essay written by both myself and Mark. If you like the video, please hit the like button. If you think we deserve it, then subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon. We got a Discord as well. I'll leave the link in the description below. And overall, just thank you very much for watching and listening all the way to the end. We'll see you again. Bye-bye.